Okay. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of MEP Dialogue. It's great to have you with us today. In our last conversation, we spoke with Egyptian human rights activist Dalia Ziadi. Today, we're joined by another remarkable woman whose story and perspective deserve so much more attention. Chama Mechtaly has dedicated her life to fostering coexistence, intercultural understanding, and meaningful dialogue between the Jewish and Muslim communities, rooted in the deep historical ties they share. Her work reclaims the often overlooked Jewish presence in North Africa while championing Muslim-Jewish reconciliation and advocating for recognition of the region's 3,000-year-old Jewish heritage. Her powerful message challenges the anti-Israel narratives by reaffirming the historical presence of Jews in the Middle East and North Africa, and by promoting the idea that Israel is an essential part of the region's cultural and historical fabric. Through her evocative and beautiful artwork and tireless activism, Chama is helping to restore the Jewish dimension of Moroccan identity, weaving it back into the broader national narrative. With her unique heritage bridging both the Jewish and Muslim worlds, she brings a powerful and unifying voice to the conversation of expanding the Abraham Accords. So who is Chama Mechtaly? Chama, we ask you to share your story, and it's an honor to be your friend, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric, and I'm glad to speak to your audience. So I usually introduce myself as half Jewish, half Muslim, and 100% Zionist, just to kind of facilitate the introduction. But basically, I'm a patrilineal Jew, and my mother is Muslim. I was born and grew up in Casablanca, Morocco, until I was 17 years old. And from a young age, I knew that we were different. I knew that I was different. I knew that my last name was different. And I was basically kind of harassed and bullied for my difference, but I didn't fully understand why. And so from middle school, I basically delved really deep into understanding the histories of minorities in North Africa and the Middle East, and really sought to understand what makes me and my family different, and why is our story, which is a story of the Jews and the indigenous people of the Middle East and North Africa, not represented in mainstream spaces, in our schools, in our textbooks, in the media. And so I became an activist at the age of 13, 14 years old, really pushed for the representation of Jewish identity and indigenous Amazigh identity in different spaces, starting with my schools. I was met with a lot of resistance, and teachers would subtract from my grades and would basically punish me for even raising the Jewish question, and talking about all of the other components that make up the fabric of the region. And so very shortly afterwards, I realized that that message about the indigeneity of the Jewish people in the region, it was not going to land unless I come up with sort of safer spaces or containers for people to absorb that information. And that's what made me pivot or use my art for activism from a really young age. And I started setting up exhibitions all over and really taking my art in all kinds of unlikely spaces, and in public spaces as a way to spark that conversation that was just omitted, completely suppressed from our schools. And this led to many years of kind of touring across continents and taking my art everywhere. And it led to a big solo exhibition in Casablanca in 2015 that was censored and banned by the Islamists who were in power at the time, and who violently confiscated one of my paintings, which was a revision of the Moroccan flag, but instead of the 5-pillar branched star, it was a 6-pillar, basically Magen David, but with the 3 languages that make up Moroccan and North African identity. So that's Arabic, Hebrew, and Tifinagh. Tifinagh is the script of the Amazigh indigenous people of North Africa. And there was so much resistance and backlash from that exhibition, and it kind of, made the news nationally, and I got a lot of death threats for it. And I think our audience has to remember the time in which this took place. It was, still, the days of the Arab Spring, and there's a lot of turmoil around identity and politics in the region. But more importantly, the Islamists had gained a lot more control and dominance over political spaces and were starting to strip away civil liberties. And this is all important because we will revisit this when we delve deeper into other questions. But basically, it became really unsafe for me to be in Morocco, even though I was in and out. I went to college in the United States. I went to Brandeis University to study conflict resolution and international relations. I would say that's what really shaped my American experience. So a lot of progressive values, of course. I was really shaped by the culture of the sort of Jewish reform American institution and became a little bit Ashkenazi. And basically, after that exhibition in Morocco, things became really unsafe for me. And at the same time, I started noticing a bit of a whiz of fresh air, of difference taking shape in the Gulf specifically. And so I ended up moving to Dubai in 2016, and I lived there almost for 7 years, worked a lot on regional integration and on translating the Abraham Accords into people-to-people initiatives, as well as using entrepreneurship and business as a way to really create and deepen understanding between Muslims and Jews. And got more and more involved with policy after the Abraham Accords because I saw it as an opportunity to really contribute meaningfully to the peace movement. And then at the end of 2022, I was doing a tour in the United States talking about the potential of the Abraham Accords and this really historic moment that we found ourselves in. And I realized that the gaps between the Middle East and the United States and Israel and the United States, including between Jewish Americans and Israel, had really widened from when I was in college, even though I was in a very progressive college. And that broke my heart. And it was kind of a call to action for me to move back to the United States and to work on bridging those gaps, because I realized no matter how much we try to move the Middle East and Israel and the Arab world towards peace and regional integration through this framework of the Abraham Accords, it wasn't going to succeed when the United States was moving away and becoming more extreme towards Israel and the region. And when this environment of political polarization in the US was really taken away from that potential for regional integration. So as someone who spoke the kind of progressive intersectional language very well, I figured it's time for me to come back and to try and save American civilization in all the aspects that I grew to love and to appreciate, and that I fell in love as a teenager when I first came here. I was on a visit during the summer as a 14-year-old, so between middle school and high school. And Rhode Island was my kind of first port of entry, Boston, Rhode Island. So, of course, very democratic. I met Ashkenazi Jews for the first time, and I realized that Jews speak English as well. And that was kind of like a wake up moment for me. And I thought, okay, well, I have to learn English because it's one of my people's mother tongues. And I was so really mesmerized and so astonished by this model of religious pluralism, of democracy, of freedom, of liberty, of tolerance, and inclusion and diversity that I witnessed here that summer. And so I went back to Morocco totally transformed, and I think, left a bit of my heart here in the US.
Well, we're glad you're here with us now. When I think one of the first times we met, it was an event of a interfaith or intercultural meeting of women. It was down in a law firm in southern Manhattan, and a number of the women who were there, who are my good friends, were progressive liberal women who were Zionists. The problem was they felt a sense of betrayal after October 7th and abandoned. And you refer to yourself as a Zionist, and you obviously have liberal. By the way, my kids both went to Brandeis, so I understand the Brandeis real well.
Yeah.
So, how did you navigate that post October 7th world? And what did you think about the pro Hamas, if you will, protests on college campuses, being, as you're a self described Zionist?
Yeah, I actually had shied away from identifying so publicly as a Zionist up until October 7th, because I realized that we did ourselves a disfavor by being in these sort of interfaith peace building spaces and communities and just showing up in the world without owning Zionism, because that left a gap, a vacuum for extremists to own it and to define it in a way that serves their extremist terrorist agendas and anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist agendas. And so I really wanted to own that word as much as I could. So I put it on my bio on social media. And I really just felt that we had to take ownership of it as much as possible and to show up in the world in all of our diversity, as Zionists, as Jews, as liberals, as democratically sort of left-leaning individuals, and to really add layers to what Zionism means, because it became so reduced, so minimized, and so misrepresented across the media and across obviously academic and institutional spaces. To be honest with you, when October 7th happened, that was the most heartbreaking, painful day of my life. It continues to be.
Where
It
were
was
you on October 7th?
I was in New York City. I found out about 2 a.m. from my best friend, who's American Israeli, lives in Beersheba, is a volunteer with MADA, Magen David Adom, and a firefighter. And him and I had done a lot of work together on regional integration and peace building. So, he was a huge ally for my work and for peace in the Middle East. And he called me up at 2 a.m. to tell me that we're not going to be able to meet in Dubai the week after because we had some work there, because there is a war in Israel. He said this is worse than Yom Kippur War. It's worse than 9/11. And he's, started showing me, shrapnels and, images of rockets falling on homes, and just said that no one really knows the scale, but him having been a MADA volunteer for 13 years, he said this was unprecedented. And so I knew that early 2 a.m. on Saturday morning that the world will never be the same. And I went on social media to look at what was happening. So I didn't sleep that whole night, and I consumed all of the horrific videos of all the Hamas barbarism and atrocities and tried to make sense of what was happening, and really felt like it was a surreal parallel universe with I think the biggest question reigning on my head at the time is, how could this happen? How could this happen? How could they break into Israel? Because it's not like I don't know the sheer level of atrocity and terrorism and barbarism, because I grew up in the Middle East and North Africa. I understand how fundamentalist Islamist ideology works. I worked on interfaith dialogue as a way to de-radicalize cultures.